goes into an idea, the market versus the economy. They're not one and the same. There's overlap. They're two different and related items. People often mistake the two, one for the other.
Yeah, and I mean, generally speaking, the market is a discounting mechanism that's discounting. In fact, I would argue is is overly discounting one way or the other. Um, on a regular basis. I think we talked about this. We talked about it offline. I don't know if we talked about it online, that there may have been an inflection here recently that, I mean, we're once again seeing our earnings for our companies come in good. In fact, they've been through this whole period where they've underperformed stock price wise. They've actually in general done pretty well in their earnings. They've managed well. We can't, in the aggregate, you always have your problem children, but in the aggregate, they've managed through this difficult time, both COVID and post-COVID, well. What we're seeing now is actually really good earning. Like, they're banging it out of the park at the moment, and almost across the board. Even the problem children are acting better. And, I think that could be an inflection. If you were to get a combination of relief on the interest rate and inflation side continuing, and I think you will. God forbid you should actually get some policies that are halfway decent, or at least just a stopping of the massive spending sprees that we've seen over recent years. Which means, as let's put it this way, a government which doesn't allow that to happen, i.e. a divided government, might be the best darn thing that could possibly happen. Keep everything at bay, keep them from being crazy in their spending. If we got that combined with the inflation and interest rate relief, it could be a Katie bar the door, rest of the market starts to really pick up, and then you could go on to really significant new highs, and you might see those larger companies. And actually, given the size of those companies now, that 7 to 10 companies that drive the market for the most part, you might actually see the overall market averages not really do as well. And you'll start to see some of these smaller and mid cap indices, and just in general, the broader market do pretty well. But it may not show up as much in the averages because they're so heavily, because all these averages are market capitalization weighted. You could end up seeing where the overall market, if those, if the Magnificent Seven should suddenly stall, which would not be surprising given how they have driven things, you could see the overall market averages maybe look like yawners, and the smaller indices and the broader market do reasonably well. I think that's probably an inflection that's, if it hasn't happened already, it's probably out there in the not too distant future.
But do you think that we're talking about the differences between the stock market and the economy and the distinction between the two? It's not merely a question of the fact that the stock market can be manipulated by the performance of a few outliers in terms of size. The stock market generally gives, the old adage back when I was in high school used to be, the stock market allegedly gives you the opinion of what the economy is going to be 6 months from now. And I think that and it's important to see that the stock market is a method for investment, but that can often be very different than what we're seeing in terms of real transacting of business in the economy. Sure. And also the stock market is structured in such a way, just the way that it works. You've got a few companies that can really pull the stock market up. And then also, let's face it, a lot of America doesn't own assets. So it's very easy to have a situation like 2020, the second half of 2020, where the people who own assets, and I'm closer to a have than a have not. So I'm putting myself in this category,
right?
By the grace of God, I should point out, but did pretty well. But the Main Street
did very well.
But not everyone has a healthy retirement account full of stocks, things like that. So you can have a very good performing stock market that really just makes the rich richer and doesn't do anything for the average person's experience in the economy as a whole.
Well, that's the problem with why, when we talk about these few gigantic companies that have, advantages in the market. And let me put a footnote on all of this. I am absolutely opposed to, what we're seeing right now, and it's kind of oxymoronic. We're seeing the FTC putting the brakes on every merger and acquisition, it seems, that comes along. We're seeing the government trying to sue some of these, what are really great companies, and I may have my issues with individually these gigantic companies, the Magnificent Seven or 10, whatever you want it to be. But in general, they've been great companies and they've been very successful. So it's the oxymoronic aspect of it is there's aspects to where the government has allowed this to happen, not because they were necessarily trying to benefit those companies, but in their effort to try and I'm not even going to say this is nefarious. I've made this point before. In the effort to try and stop the ills that have happened over the last few decades, every crisis results in some sort of government intervention that's regulatory. Just by that very nature, they've made it harder for smaller businesses to compete with these guys. Okay, that doesn't mean I want them to go out and take these companies apart. These are some of the greatest companies in the world. They happen to be American companies. God forbid what we're doing is out there trying to crush our American great companies, while inadvertently propping up, foreign actors that are not necessarily our friends. I think that's the difficult, and I'll use that term again, oxymoronic situation that we find ourselves in, and where we have to be careful not to confuse globalism with the global economy, for one thing. I'm all for, as much as we possibly can, have the trade situation be as level as we can. And I think the way to do that is one-on-one trade deals, not massive, huge, gigantic, everybody's involved in a North American free trade deal or a generally accepted agreement on tariffs, the GATT type stuff. Now we're getting into the weeds, but my point is, I don't want to take these. I want government out there taking our great companies apart. By the same token, I want the government to get the heck out of the business world and let small businesses flourish. And when they put onerous regulations on small businesses, everything from the corner grocery store to the mid-sized wealth management firm gets negatively affected and has a hard time competing with those larger companies. And like I said, I don't think it doesn't even have to be nefarious. It just happens. It's what happens. And so I think that any relief on that front could be a great boon to business, because the fact is there's plenty of still, despite all the problems we have culturally and what have you, there's still some great innovative ideas out there, primarily emanating from America, but also other places that are, we talk about Israel all the time, and Israel's in the news a lot because of the horror of what's happening with their war, but remarkable technology that comes out of that place. And there's a symbiotic relationship between the technology sector here and the technology sector there, and each one can help the other, and vice versa, whatever. So the bottom line, as you asked this question about market, is I think we might be looking at a bit of an inflection here, and if we get some things right on the policy side, it could be really a good time.